Hi, everyone. We are delighted to welcome you to this year's Ask the Clergy. This has become I guess it's a tradition at this point for us. We've been doing it now for a number of years on either the last Shabbat of the secular year or the second to last Shabbat, depending on how the weeks align. And typically in a normal year, when we weren't navigating a pandemic, we would, in the middle of our service, in the place of a sermon, open up this opportunity to ask the clergy any question, silly to serious and everything in between, on one's mind. And we do our best to answer on the spot. This year, because of the pandemic, it opened a different opportunity for us to gather questions over a period of about almost a week at this point. And we have had the chance to look through them. We were so pleased to get so many questions, and we've picked a few that we think offer a pretty diverse spectrum of curiosities and opportunities for exploration that we'll do our best to answer with you this year. And we'll hope that when next year's Ask the Clergy opportunity comes around, we'll all be back in person in the sanctuary to be able to do that. But I will say, I think that this might be the first year that all four of us have done Ask the Clergy together, because usually one, two, sometimes three of us are on vacation during this time. So who knows, maybe something new is happening, and it will certainly birth a diversity of answers and remind us that in any question, the Jewish way is not a definitive answer, but a number of different pathways that one can choose. And so that would be our main caveat before we begin, that each of us is answering as ourselves based on our own viewpoints. And as is true in our Jewish tradition, there are many on any given topic. So just to begin with that disclaimer, we will move forward to our first question. And so Rabbi Green will offer us her insights and responses to this one. How does the Jewish religion reconcile the story of creation with the scientific proof of dinosaurs? Dinosaurs roamed the earth millions of years before humans, but humans were created on day 6. If we need to reconcile the two by saying the story of creation is a metaphor, then how do we know what in the Torah to take literally and what to take metaphorically? We're beginning with a big one.
You know, I've never actually thought of it explicitly with dinosaurs, but I've definitely thought of it vis-a-vis evolution. So, great question. And a question that is actually central to the early development of the Reform movement, right? Because as early Reform Jews gained civil rights in Germany and then throughout Europe after Napoleon, they gained a university education that they didn't previously have access to. And so suddenly there was this trying to reconcile, well, here's Torah and here's science, and what do I do with it? So not only is this a great question, but it's also deeply ingrained within our reform movement. That being said, there are those for whom Torah is God written, God created, God given, and it's all true. And there are those for whom it is God divinely inspired and written by humans, and even more specifically written by men, because that was the time. And so for me, Torah is a human written document, a document written by humans. And I don't know what's true or not, but I always say it doesn't matter what's historically true, but because there's so much to learn from it. So to this question, for me, I deeply love the story of creation. It is one of the most beautiful stories of the Torah. I continue to teach small children these wonderful songs about creation that I learned as a small child. I think Dr. Lee Friedman and I are the only people singing these songs anymore. They're awesome. Like, in the beginning, Bereshit. Oh, Cantor Gold sings this too. Thank you. But I don't take it as it was actually 6 days. I mean, it doesn't work for me. That doesn't mean it shouldn't work for anyone listening to this conversation. For me, there's metaphor, there's an understanding of that. That's how the time was understood. And that science teaches us a great deal, but we can still learn from Torah. Ultimately, whether Torah is historically true, I don't think matters. I mean, there's lots of archaeological evidence for different pieces. You know, there'll be a New York Times headline that says like, oh, we found the golden calf, or we saw evidence of a flood, and there's lots of good stuff there. But ultimately, we can learn from Torah, whether it's historically true or not. We can take the story of creation, for example, and not have to worry about whether it's historically accurate, and say, look, it's about gratitude. It's about awe. It's about appreciating God as a creator, which may be a God concept for some of us, and it may not be, but there's many ways to look at that. So great question. I know I didn't explicitly answer to dinosaurs, but I tried to speak about the general terms of evolution and growth.
Thank you, Rabbi Green. That was a great answer to a tricky question. And I just should also say that for the asker of that question, or for anyone else out there who that has been a question for, and if you want to talk more about it or anything else, we do hope you know that you don't have to wait until the last Shabbat of a given year to ask us any questions or all questions, right? We are open and actually love talking about and answering any of your questions anytime. So just take that as an open invitation. All right, so we're going to move forward now. In some respects, this question is a nice springboard from how you answered the last question, Rabbi Green, in that it's the idea of, okay, so where were we before and where are we now, and what do we take with us? And I will also say that some of these questions are very intense. So we will try to lighten it a bit in a few minutes, but our first few questions are pretty deep. So we hope you'll enjoy that. So this next question, Rabbi Daniels, is for you. What would Jews from 2,000 and 3,000 years ago recognize in today's American Reform Jewish culture? What elements that are explicitly Jewish survived Babylonian exile, Persian rule, Hellenistic empire, and can be found in the diaspora today?
I want to answer that question as rabbinic as I can, and so I'll do that by telling a quick story and then jotting down 3 points that I thought about as this question came to us. So here's the story. It comes from Talmud. It's an incredible creative writing exercise. The rabbis actually thought along these lines of the questioner, and they imagined, what would it be like if someone from our past saw the Judaism that we were creating today? And so the rabbis create this story that appears in our Talmud, and the setting is Mount Sinai, and it's Moses approaching God as God is handing Moses the Torah, right? It speaks to what Rabbi Green just spoke about. This is, of course, in the imagination of the rabbis. They said Moses looked at God, and God was creating the little crowns on top of each of the letters of the text. If you've seen the scroll, you know that there's beautiful calligraphy and crowns on many of the letters. And Moses says, God, why would you need these crowns? Why would you need to embellish and expand on the beautiful work that is Torah, just the fixed letter? And God looks to Moses and says, well, in generations, they're going to find meaning in this crown. And Moses asks, what are you talking about? What do you mean? And it's this teleportation. God says, turn around. And in Talmud, we see that Moses is teleported to the classroom of the Rabbi Akiva, this great teacher, this great scholar, and he's sitting in the back of Akiva's classroom in the 8th row, and he's listening to Akiva talk about the laws and Jewish tradition to his students. And the students are asking questions, and you can imagine what they're asking. But certainly Moses wasn't familiar with any of these rabbinic concepts, all of the rules that came after the Bible was codified. And it's asked of Akiva, where does all this come from? And Akiva's response is, well, this is the Torah that God handed Moses atop Mount Sinai. You could see sort of the light bulb that might have gone off over Moses's head. I think that what that story conveys to me is this understanding that generation after generation finds deeper and more and expanded understanding of Jewish tradition, and our tradition continues to evolve, and I think becomes better as we wrestle with the text and we understand it through our own lenses. So let's think about what might have been preserved over these 2,000, 3,000 years. And the questioner asks about Babylonian exile, Persia, and the third, Hellenism. Right?
Hellenism.
Great. So a quick look. Let's start from the Babylonian exile. This, of course, is a time when the people are moved from the land of Israel to Babylonia, and they are for the first time without the temple, the cult, the Jewish structures, the tools that they had at their disposal in the land of Israel. And so it's their job at that point to create a Judaism to offer meaning and connection for all of them there. That's where some of our fixed liturgy comes from. We know that there were public fast days. All of these are things that you'll still see within our Jewish world today, certainly in our Reform community as well. They're also the writers of the Babylonian Talmud, which is the Talmud when you're studying Talmud. So much of their tradition is preserved, and we continue to wrestle and study. Let's move a little bit to Persia, right? When you think about Persia, what's the first thing that comes to mind but the story of Purim, right? And Purim is a story not of biblical miracles and magic, that of Moses and the parting of the sea, but it's a story of human power and the abilities we have to change the world. And the hero of that story is Esther. And so if we were to look at our modern Reformed communities, we are an egalitarian community where we have benefited and thrived under leadership of powerful women. And I think that's something that we borrow from that period of time. And let's move a little bit even further. This is what's the movie? I'm missing a reference here as the time warp to Hellenism, right? It's in these Hellenist dynasties around the Mediterranean. We're thinking Macedonia and the kingdoms that flourished after the Greeks. There was the development of cities, right? These empires that allowed for education and the sharing of ideas, an influence of modernity on their practice and their lives. And that is what Reform Judaism was. It was created to meet the moment of modernity, to meet current times, for people to be able to preserve their Jewish identities and live within the context of our modern lives, and to be able to study science and art and trade. And so Hellenism opened so many doors to the Jewish journey, and certainly is at the root of our modern Reform practice.
Awesome. Thank you. It was beautiful. And if you needed to really dumb down that historical answer, I often say it's feasts, fasts, and candles, right? Sort of the rudiments of Torah-itic biblical Judaism, whether that had to do with fire from ritual sacrifice, choosing sacred times to eat or not to eat, sort of like the thread through all of those various experiences. All right, Cantor Goldstein, we're going to turn to you. Staying in the realm of the serious and intense here, we got two different questions that sort of navigate in a similar theological realm. So we'll put them out there. And I think, Cantor Goldstein, you can answer them, and then I'll turn to the colleagues here as well if there's anything any of us want to add, just because I think in particular when it comes to how we understand God, sometimes it's helpful to hear variant understandings because there are just so many. So two different questions that kind of navigate in a similar realm. One person writes, when I meditate, I sometimes feel that I am having a spiritual encounter with God, but does God encounter me? And the second question is, how do Mother Nature, how does nature and God, how do these two entities work together? So we'll turn it over to you.
Great. So I feel like these questions are so interconnected with one another, as are some of the answers. Rabbi Green was talking about the aftermath of the emancipation process that happened during the end of the French rule, and how we were able to integrate into society, and it was as a direct result of that the notion of a sort of a single way of observing Judaism was sort of turned on its head, and as a result of that, we started to be able to explore various philosophical and theological constructs for the way we approach God, and I think both of these questions link to just that kind of thing. So, for instance, if you happen to be someone that was an existentialist, maybe a Buber devotee, you would have absolutely no problem answering the question whether God heard your prayer and somehow that there was this conduit between you and God. It absolutely exists. It's there, and God hears your prayer. If, however, you are somewhat more of a rationalist, and you felt more like Cohen, and I'm forgetting the first name, maybe Abraham Cohen, but Herman Cohen. Herman Cohen, sorry. So then you would have this rationalist model where you have ethics and science and aesthetics sort of rotating and being very finely balanced, and so the notion of communicating back and forth with God is not necessarily a construct that meshes with that so easily, but it doesn't mean that God isn't there. It just means that you might not have that kind of communication ongoing. It might be more of an expression that you're offering that is more in sync. Now, likewise, if you were a devotee of Kaplan, that you might think God is sort of out of the picture altogether, but that the land and that the creation is a more important aspect, and other philosophers have held this as well. I mean, Spinoza would have completely had God out of the picture, but would have gone with the morals, the moral constructs that were so important in the Torah. But at a certain point, we begin to explore these things for ourselves, and in fact, I think over time we change. I mean, I don't know about my colleagues, but I know that I was very, very much a rationalist early on in my thinking, and over time I have moved much more towards being an existentialist, where I really have this sense of this communication going back and forth. So to answer that question for me about does God respond and does God hear, I mean for me personally, yes, and I even have times when I've experienced something that I can only describe as evidence of that. One time while visiting a member of the congregation in the hospital, we were together and opposite one another, and at one point this patient asked me to sing a particular psalm. I sang the psalm, and there something entered the space that we both recognized independently that I can only describe as the Shekhinah. as something holy, something, you know, God's presence entered the space. Something similar to that happened. I was in a moment as serving as the cantor of a congregation in Atlanta. I was actually was the Vino Malcano, was facing away from the congregation. I was facing the ark as I typically would do, and during that prayer, I felt something happen, and I also identified it with another person in the room. There were 1,000+ people in the room. After the service, I went up to this person and said, and asked them if they felt something at that moment. And they looked at me, they said, "How did you know? How did you know that I was experiencing the same thing at that moment?" And I can only describe it as something outside of my ability to understand, something divine. And so I think ultimately for both of these questions, it's a matter of where's your theology, where's your understanding of how you approach your God, in the rationalist terms, your God idea, and by finding that and by exploring that, then those kinds of questions will help you not only navigate your understanding of God, but help you navigate how that evolves over time.
Yeah, thank you so much for that synopsis, essentially, of Jewish theology and the variations of it, and I think more importantly for your sharing of your personal experience. I'm wondering if Rabbi Daniels or Rabbi Green has anything they'd like to share just along how they might answer these questions for themselves. There's no pressure to that. Go ahead.
There are about a million things to go to. Kiana Goldstein, the moment that came to mind for me was in your describing, I think it was a hospital room, right? My second year out of rabbinical school, so when I was a Rabbi Temple Jeremiah, I did a 6-month internship at Evanston Hospital in clinical pastoral education. And I would do on-calls at night like other people doing CPE do. And I went to visit a patient who wanted to talk to me, but was in the bathroom. Don't worry, I did not go into her bathroom. And I sat on the floor of her hospital room outside her bathroom, or knelt, I don't remember, and had this deep spiritual conversation about God and the meaning of life, and later wrote about it for my program. And that stays with me. I mean, I can visualize that moment. And it was one of other moments, many moments of total stranger. We never met face to face, but God was in that moment. And I very much, I mean, as people who study with me know that I'm very much of a non-rationalist. You know, I don't know that God hears my prayers on certain things, but if someone I'm concerned about and loves needs prayer, I pray for health, for example. So a mixture of different theologians there.
And I just sort of want to like call out in particular, I think what you just said at the end about what we might assume are two viewpoints or constructs that we are, I think, taught in our society can't abide each other, like they can't sit together. And I think one of the wonderful opportunities when it comes to theology, in particular Jewish theology, is the flexibility to say there is no hypocrisy within a certain tent. But you know, that one can not believe in an interactive, personalized God, and one might still pray in a construct of personal relationship. And the answer to that is yes, that it can hold. I just want to name that because I know for me personally, as I've developed over the years, that used to be a real stumbling block for me. And the period of time when I was able to release that was certainly empowering and remains empowering. And I just really appreciate the honesty that you offer in all of what you said, but in particular, that last articulation.
I often put it in these terms. Let's say in a mathematical equation, 2 + 2 = 4, but with theology, 2 + 2 might equal 5, and that's okay.
Yeah, beautiful.
And then
Thank
it's
you.
not irrational, it's non-rational.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And that's key distinction.
Yeah, thank you. Rabbi Daniels, just unmute. Yeah.
I was going to say that yes and yes and yes, and we often share our stories of encounters with God. This is something that we do. I would invite everybody, right? If you find a friend that you can share some of these moments with. I also, thinking about what you just said, Rabbi Geffen, is I think for the rational among us, when we have these extraordinary experiences around major life cycle events, around B'nai Mitzvah and weddings and births and even funerals and deaths, and if we don't allow ourselves to fully experience and be open to to that divine encounter, I think afterwards sometimes that can lead to feelings of shame or guilt, and I think that we need to train ourselves. Part of the practice, right, is to be aware of it, and if it doesn't make sense right now, that's all right.
Can I say something to that? I forgot part of it. I mean, to your point, I mean, I think societally we are trained to not embrace those, right? I mean, I always say that small children are the best, people discuss theology with. I don't mean in some intense, large word kind of way, but like 3, 4, and 5-year-olds have these incredible concepts of God, right? And even by the time we start talking with 13-year-olds around bar and bat mitzvah, they're often sort of socially trained to like, well, this isn't something I talk about, or this isn't something I believe in. And so it's to affirm them and to give ourselves the space and to acknowledge what is, my favorite lesson. This is a really beautiful old fountain pen of my grandfather's, right now tarnished. But if we were to describe this pen, it has many, many descriptors, but there's only one pen. And that is such an important concept in terms of Shema, right? Because we sing Shema, we say Shema, Adonai Echad, there's one God, but there is not one way. I think the grammar is going to be, there's not just one way, to think about God. There are so many. And those in the adult B'nai Mitzvah class, who I hope are watching this conversation, I've been talking a lot about this in the last few weeks, that we each have our own conceptions of God. So it's confirming, affirming our conceptions of God and our different experiences. And to your point of lifting that up and giving us the possible there.
And I think I would just add into this and sort of key in a little more toward the second question about nature and God. For me, certainly the way I see things currently is that it is all one. And we spend so much time deconstructing in this era of ultra rationalism. What is it? I know it. And if it doesn't fit into the box that I understand and am comfortable with, then it cannot be. And and that's science, right? Science in its root means to cut, to dissect, to tear apart. But religion, faith, is about putting things back together. And I do believe that in our Jewish understanding, however orthodox or esoteric one wants to be, all of these are still in the one. I often, a meditation I do pretty regularly, I will go outside, stand as sort of strong, is as strong of a posture as I can. And I focus on my feet and I think to myself, I am standing on an earth that is spinning incredibly fast around itself. And this spinning is spinning around a sun joined by other planets faster than anything that I can conceive of. And this universe, our galaxy is spinning around other galaxies and other galaxies. And all of this to the ends of all space and time is somehow happening and somehow being held together. And I am here and getting a call on my cell phone. I am here, you know, after I had my morning cup of coffee. And for me, it's this like grand reminder that I, as a small little teeny speck of a thing, am part of this grand thing that I could never fully understand. And I call that God. You know, God's just 3 letters, maybe 2, depending on how you write it, right? It isn't meant to be definable, you know? And there's something really beautiful about that. So like, how does Mother Nature and God, how do they work together? Symbiotically. There are just one thing. We spend a lot of time pretending it's different things. I don't know that it's different things. I think it's all part of the same thing. You know, we're all made up of the stars. Somehow they got in us. And if that's not God, or whatever one wants to call God, and if that's not nature, I don't really know what that is. And I guess that is sacred curiosity, which also could be an avenue to God. So I think like I really appreciated this opportunity for us to talk about. And as Rabbi Daniel said, I hope it's something that for anyone who's listening, that can be empowering for you to navigate these sorts of conversations and curiosities. And if you don't have a friend who you're comfortable sharing this with, this is like literally what we were trained to do, the 4 of us. So we would love to have this conversation with you, wherever you are.
What we like to do.
Yeah, exactly. So one last final question. And this is for all 4 of us. We will use it as our concluding question, which is, what has been the most challenging, fulfilling, surprising, we get to choose, says the asker of the question, aspect of our rabbinate or cantorate during COVID-19? So Rabbi Daniels, you want to go first?
Yeah, one of the most nourishing experiences that I know the 4 of us have all shared is I don't know of a single B'nai Mitzvah who has said, we can't have people in the room, we can't have our celebration, we can't do that family travel, we can't take pictures, we can't get a new dress, we can't, right? All of the things that they might have anticipated and expected would be a part of their becoming B'nai Mitzvah. Not a single student said, no, I don't want to do it, right? I think that our 7th graders, our B'nai Mitzvah, our kids have inspired us in these past couple months to continue to choose life, to continue to engage in this Jewish life that we've created for ourselves. They should be commended, and they've inspired me.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Cantor Goldstein?
Well, I mean, that's a tough one to follow because I agree completely with that. I think that there are a few things that really stood out. One was how something that was so isolating as what we have to do to protect ourselves also became an opportunity for so many people to come together and respond. And the response has been so heartwarming, and I think so powerful for us as a community, as a congregation. And we see it in so many ways, whether it's all the work that goes behind the scenes to make sure that the parking lot Shabbats happen, or the baskets the bags that we gave out for the holy days or for Hanukkah. I mean, these things were just labors of love, and I think so powerful in what they do for our community, lifting up the importance of responding and being there for one another. And then there was one other that for some reason, when you ask the question, it just pops into my head, and it was this was the first year we we didn't have our longstanding Baltikia. And it was such a painful thing for us to lose Barry this past year. And yet there we had a young man who stood up as our new Baltikia. And if there was ever sort of a sign of hope for, a representation of the next generation carrying our traditions forward, it was watching our Baltikia blow shofar in the parking lot for everyone to hear, and with such confidence and power, and it was a wonderful moment, I think, for me.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and I mean, that student who knew Barry was influenced and mentored by Barry as well. You talk about L'Ador Vador, or a memory of a person being a blessing, and how that can be made manifest physically, literally, in this sense. Beautiful. Thank you. Rabbi Green.
While you were telling that, I was struck with memories of Barry, thinking of his grandchildren, including the newest recently born, and also remembering that our newest Baltikia, Sam, I think maybe the one Pigeon Haben I officiated at, right? So I was thinking of little baby Sam in Bucktown, like what in his family's townhouse, and just thinking of him standing there. I think I'll put those together. I'm sitting here crying. It's so good. The power for me has been yes, and everything you said. I mean, the life cycle events and the learning that, come on, we would have thought was impossible, right? So, and it's not. If anything, it's been elevated. It's not what any of us wanted to do, right? But I am just struck by 2 conversions that I officiated at. One was, a Beit Din for a conversion. Like, she taught our Beit Din, our 3-person rabbinic court, over Zoom, 9 months pregnant, and roughly 10 days later had a baby. And then 8 days later, we named that baby over Zoom. So it was like, here's the life cycle. And this, new mom had part of her project for being conversion. I asked students to take on one little corner of the Jewish world that they want to be expert in, was about being a Jewish parent. And she interviewed people and really was like, I want to know how to do this. I'm like, you know how to do it. And then we took her to the lake for mikvah later. I mean, she couldn't, the mikvah's not open, but we went to Lake Michigan over the summer instead of a mikvah. And then had another conversion, a student who became Jewish right before her son's bar mitzvah. And there's a reform response so that you can go in the swimming pool if there's no mikvah. And the lake was way too cold at that point. And she became Jewish in a swimming pool. And she had studied and worked and all that. And those 2, and then one more sort of in a different realm, is our adult B'nai Mitzvah class. They began their studies last January. It's an 18 to 24 month long program, and those classes usually bond very powerfully, and part of it is the schmooze factor and being in the room and the shared experience. And this class has been almost entirely online, and they've created an incredibly powerful community of supporting one another and appreciating one another and learning together. And if you asked me last March when we shut the class out of the building, I would have thought, like, this isn't going to happen. This is going to be the class that's like aggravated. No, they're not happy that they're not in person, but it's a very powerful community. And it just, I'm struck by that every time I go teach them and every time I talk with them.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think everything you all have said is so resonates so deeply for me as well. And I think probably would for anyone lucky enough to call themselves a clergy person during this time, this incredible time. For me, I've come to think of, or I've tried to force myself to think of this pandemic as essentially living a Kaddish, and not like the mourner's Kaddish, but any Kaddish, which are The Kaddish is a prayer. There's lots of different ones. Most people know the Mourner's Kaddish, maybe you know the Chatzi Kaddish, but wherever they appear, they're meant to mark transitions. They're meant to break a chapter from another chapter. And they are imbued with gratitude. Like the language of any Kaddish is just how great God is. God is great, God is wonderful, God is awesome, the best, super the best, the best, the best, the best. And you apply them in places where it's easy to find the greatness, easy to find the gratitude, and in places where it's really hard to find the gratitude. And for me, that's been a balm. And it's become a mantra really in navigating this time, which I know will be finite. It will not be forever. This is a demarcation line. I also know that whatever was before won't be the same after. Whatever the new chapter is that unfolds for each of us and all of us in a life post COVID-19 pandemic won't look like what life looked like before. And so I've tried to really embrace this liminal moment, which is months, but ultimately a moment, one that is full of incredibly deep grief, one that is filled with unbelievably profound blessing and hope, and all of it just mixed into one big stew. And so I think of the 99-year-old World War II veteran who died from surviving COVID the first time and it killing him the second time, and me being the only one to stand at his grave, at his funeral. And I think of the Zoom weddings that I've done and the couples who realized, you know, life doesn't wait for us. Why should we wait? Let's live life now. Let's love in life now. And the incredible, just the incredible gift it is that we as clergy people get to bear witness, you know, to all of that. There's nothing, you know, lots of people have great jobs, but I think our job is pretty awesome. So anyway, we are grateful that you all have been with us wherever you are, whenever you're seeing this. And we hope that these questions have, we hope that they've been interesting for you, but I think the best sign of success for Ask the Clergy would be if these questions and these answers birthed more questions, which could birth more conversations, and which could deepen those answers for each of us and all of us as we go. So we wish you an early Shabbat Shalom if you're watching this on Friday afternoon when it airs live. But whenever it airs, we hope that it finds you well and full of blessing as we embark on a new year in our secular lives soon to come. We pray 2021 will be the best year yet for each of us and all of us. Thank you all so much for being with us.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.